Okay, so we got a lot of balls in the air right now, right? So let's just quickly go over what still needs to be done for this course, and then we'll get into today's material. So the paper 2 proposal is due tonight, right? Now, one of you pointed out a discrepancy to me on the assignment sheet. I made a mistake and put a different word count for the proposal in the beginning of the paper and then in the proposal part of the assignment. So go with 250 words for the proposal. You only need to give me 250 words. I'm not going to punish you if you give me more because, again, it was ambiguous in the assignment. That was my fault. That was my mistake. But yeah, you only need to give me 250 words. Sunday, your last vocab quiz is going to be due, and again, this one's just going to replace your lowest grade. So, you should still look at it, you should still do it, but again, don't freak out about it. Also, I will give you probably tomorrow the full list of terms that I expect you to know for the exam. So look for that in your email tomorrow. I'll also post it to Georgia View in case it gets lost. Monday, we're going to be doing a prep session. So it would be a good idea for you to bring with you the vocab sheet, bring the sample exam questions with you, and come prepared with any questions that you have, like anything that you really want to go over or review before the test, which is going to be Wednesday, 10:30 to 12:30, right? And then the final paper, I think the original due date I gave you was Friday, right? The 6th. I've decided to extend that to Monday the 9th, in large part because one, I really expected there were going to be more people in this class. It caps at 30, and we had 5. So, with this plus my modern Brit-Lit class, I have 9 papers to grade, assuming everyone turns one in. So I can do that on Tuesday, right? I can handle that. That's not that big a deal. So I don't need the whole weekend to do the grading for this. So I figured I can give you a couple of extra days. Now that said, I know that the bookstore's buyback date and rental return date is well before this. So keep that in mind and prepare for it if you don't own your books or if you plan on selling them back, right? If you have to return your books or intend to return your books to the bookstore, make sure that you have photocopied the texts that you need to finish your paper before you do that. Because remember that you are expected to quote directly, right? And I've had kind of too many semesters go by where students will they'll refer obliquely to the text they're supposed to be examining closely. I was like, well, why didn't you quote anything? I said, well, I had to sell my books back. So just be prepared for that eventuality, okay? Now, does anybody have any questions about any of the stuff that's coming up? Yeah, Savannah.
So how you did with the midterm, you gave us not all the vocab words, just I don't remember how, say 30 and then only 20 of them are going to show up. Is that going to be the same for this?
It'll be the same thing. So I'll give you a slightly larger bank to choose from, and it's going to be cumulative. So there will be stuff that'll come back from last semester as well. Because we don't just forget things once we hit midterm, right? Or things that carry forward. Yeah, I think I gave you something like 25 words last time, and then there were 12 actually on the exam. So yeah, expect maybe 30, 35 words, and there will be 15 actually on the exam. However, again, studying all of the terms will also probably help you with the essay questions.
Okay. And then for the essay questions, for the midterm we did 1 for 500 words. You said we're doing 2 for 500 words
2 for
each?
500, yeah, 2 for 500 words each,
Okay.
yeah.
And there'll be 3 options?
There'll be 3 options, yeah, and they will be worded very similarly to the sample questions I gave you, they'll just ask you to refer to a specific text rather than kind of in broad strokes. And remember, another thing to keep in mind too is that each of the essays is going to be comparative, right? Each is going to expect you to refer to 2 texts.
Does it want 2 texts, like one now, one pre-midterm?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
but they are all going to they're going to expect you to compare texts to each other. So remember that, like, if you give me 500 words but you only write about one text, that's going to cost you points. Okay, anything else? And I'll provide blue books for everybody, so you won't have to bring anything with you. Except a pen. You should bring a pen. Okay, so the other thing that I did want to quickly go over before we get started. Oh, I also want to remind everybody too, because not everyone has done this, right? Please upload your presentation notes. Yes?
I uploaded mine, but were you able to view it? Because it kept telling me my format was wrong. So I finally took it, but I didn't know if you were able to.
Okay, when did you upload it? Because I looked this morning and there was nothing there.
Sunday.
Okay. I guess
I can try
again.
Okay.
I mean, I think you took pictures of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you might end up, and this sucks. You
Yeah.
might just have to type them out
Okay.
and upload this like a Word file or something.
Because it kept telling me everything was every format was wrong.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to save it as the formats it said I could use, and then it was like, nope, still wrong.
Yeah, and can you save it as a PDF? I think it usually accepts
It
PDFs.
didn't. I tried, it wouldn't take a PDF either.
Okay.
I'll just
Okay.
type it up and get it in.
It might have had to do with something to do with the size of the file. It might be
Okay.
too big. But yeah. The easiest thing would probably be, again, I know it's not the best use of your time, maybe, but would be to type it up. Yeah. I also just wanted to quickly go over with everybody again, just like what your bibliography should look like. Most of you were more or less correct in the way you set these up for your annotated bibliography. This is what MLA style looks like, right? So for a book, you're giving me last name, first name of the author of the book, right? The title, italicized or underlined, the place of publication, the publisher, and the date. For a journal article, you're giving me the last name and then the first name of the author, the title of the article in quotes, the journal title, italicized or underlined, the volume number, the issue number if there is one, there isn't always, the date, and then the page numbers. And if you're giving me a book chapter, and this also goes for things that you're taking from the anthologies, right? These should also be cited in this way. So you want me the last name and the first name of the author, the title of the chapter, the title of the book, italicized or underlined, the names of the editors, the publisher, the date, and then the page numbers. Yes?
Do those need to go in the annotated bibliography for the works we're citing?
No, I only wanted the secondary sources in the annotated bibliography.
Okay, so we don't have to cite the book at all.
You do for the paper.
So like
I still want
in
you to give me the
text.
site. Yeah, in text, and I do want you to put the texts that you're using from the anthology in your bibliography, right?
Okay, just don't annotate.
Yeah, they just weren't necessary for the annotated bibliography because all I wanted for that was secondary sources, right?
So do you want us to create another page with just those for works?
No, you can just, the bibliography at the end of your paper isn't going to need to include the annotations because I've already seen that.
Okay, so we'll just delete them and add those in.
Yeah, exactly. You can just delete those and make sure everything's in the right format, yeah. So the way this would look for like a text from the anthology, right? So say you were say you were citing the text you looked at for today, right? So it would be Smith, Zadie, the waiter's wife, Norton Anthology of English Literature, volume F. Edited by the guy who edited this. Norton, and it's pages 1238 to 1248. So that's what the citations for, the citations on your bibliography for your primary text are going to look like. Right? Cite the specific stories or poems, not the whole anthology. Okay, so does anybody have any other questions about matters bibliographical? Okay, the only other thing that I do want to note today is that because this is our last normal class meeting, I do also need for everybody to fill out the student evaluations. So we're going to stop around 1:30. I'll give you time at the end of class to do that if you have not done so on your own already. If you've already done so on your own, you can just go. Was that your question?
No, I was asking, do we have to put the date in?
Yes, you
So
do.
the date of whatever it was published?
Yes, you're right, yes. That was my mistake. I forgot to put the date of the anthology in this. But yeah, so when the hell was this stupid thing published?
Oh, the whole book? Or
Yes,
just-
2018. So this is 2018, yep.
And all
So
three
this
of the
is-
volumes will be the same date?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they're all part of the same edition. Okay, so if there are no further questions, everybody feeling good? All right. Let's talk about Zadie Smith. What y'all think of this?
I wish there would have been more of like an ending.
Okay.
Obviously there was, but I wish it would have been, I don't know, like more like, did they make it in their house? Did they find the job they actually liked? Did
Uh-huh.
they have the babies?
Okay, and I think like if you read the whole novel, you'll get all of that. So this is an excerpt from a longer piece, right? So this is part of a novel that Smith published. It was her debut novel from the year 2000 called White Teeth. And this was published as a kind of independent short story the year before, but is then kind of worked into the broader fabric of the novel. One can assume that Smith was probably working on White Teeth as she was writing this and intending to incorporate it into the bigger novel, right? So yeah, you would get more of a sense of what happens to the Joneses and the Iqbals if you read the whole novel. There's a third family that's woven into, there's an Anglo-Jewish family that is woven into that novel as well. So she's exploring the points of view of a number of different ethnic minorities in late 20th century Britain. Anything else that you guys noted about this or found interesting about this or strange or troubling?
I just felt it was different from anything we've read so far.
Okay, how so? What was different about it?
I don't think we really talked about Bangladesh. Or that's
Okay.
the Middle East, right?
So Bangladesh, okay, so Bangladesh is actually in South Asia. So brief history and geography lesson here. So British India, and this is only an approximate notion of what that looked like. My map drawing skills are about as good as Colin's are. British India consisted of what are now 5 different modern nations, right? So in 1947, India is both recognized as an independent country and is also partitioned into, at the time, 2 different countries. The Muslim majority, the majority population overall in India was Hindu. However, the majority population in the northern parts of British India was Muslim. And Muslims in the north were worried about whether they would have equal rights and equal treatments in a majority Hindu state. So a compromise was worked out with the British government where parts of British India were carved out, both in the northwest and the northeast, and became the new nation of Pakistan. Now, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, there's actually a civil war between these 2 different Pakistans. And East Pakistan becomes Bangladesh. And West Pakistan remains Pakistan. Here's India. Down here is the island of Sri Lanka. And over here would be what the British called Burma, which is now Myanmar. So from this one administrative region came, these 5 different modern countries, right, that now are often at odds with each other. But yes, the Iqbals come from Bangladesh. And what's Samad Iqbal's experience of Britishness and of the British Empire? What's his history with the empire?
He fought in the war.
Yeah, he fought in the British Army in World War II, right? He and his friend Archie Jones, right, a white Englishman. The name Jones actually indicates Welsh ancestry. Were both assigned to the same tank regiment, right? And they served in the same tank. So this can actually connect us, I think, with some of the history that we discussed last class. Right, so Samad's service in the army does, to some extent, kind of entitle him to work and benefits in Britain proper, right? And remember that, yeah, it's in the post-World War II era that we get these waves of immigrants, first from the Caribbean, and then from South Asia and from Africa. It's probably good, like when, we may have talked about this before, but when you see someone in a British story or play or poem referred to as Asian, right? When we use this term in the US, we usually mean East Asian, right? We're usually talking about someone who's of Chinese or Japanese or Korean ancestry. Usually in Britain, someone of East Asian ancestry will be referred to simply in terms of their country of ethnic origin, right? Asian almost exclusively refers to people from South Asia. So the Iqbals are Asian in that British sense, right? They're Bangladeshi, so they are Asian. Right. So does that help clarify a little bit for you, like where they're coming from here? Yeah. So we're getting kind of like the fruits of this kind of cracking up of the British Empire after World War II, right? In fact, this happens just about immediately after World War II. What else do we know about Samad and about his kind of life situation? Yeah, what's he doing for a living?
He's a waiter.
Yeah, he's a waiter. And is he good at it?
Not, according to, what was his name?
Uh-huh.
According to him, he's a completely shit waiter.
Yeah, well, I think let's see, kind of, maybe we can look at the system here that operates for tips in this restaurant, right? So how are tips distributed in the restaurant where Samad works?
Just put it in the piss pot.
The piss pot, yeah, everything goes in the piss pot. So yeah, tips go into a communal bucket, right? And then everyone divides them up at the end. And who dislikes this system? Yes, Shiva. And how is Shiva different from the other waiters?
He makes good money because like he flirts with all the old ladies.
Yeah. A lot of it is he's younger and better looking than the others, right? So he gets better tips. Yeah, this is described like is referred to as like flirting with blubberous old divorcees and things like that, right? But what is that like? So he's younger, he's better looking, right? So there's a generational difference between Shiva and the other men who work in the restaurant. And I think that we can see some of that also in Alsana's relationship with her niece Nina, which we'll go back to in a minute. But I think there's also, there are different sets of values here at work here, right? So let's look at page 1239 where the piss pot system is first described to us. Can I get somebody to start reading for us at the bottom of the page? It starts with the piss pot was a black cooking pot.
The piss pot was a black cooking pot that sat on a plinth outside the staff toilets, into which all tips were pooled and then split at the end of the night. For the younger, good-looking waiters like Shiva, this was a great injustice. Shiva was the only Hindu on the staff, a tribute to his waitering skills that had triumphed over religious difference. He could make 15 pounds in tips in an evening if the blubberous white divorcee in the corner was lonely enough, and he batted his long lashes at her effectively. He also made money from the polo neck directors and producers. The palace sat at the center of London's theatre land, who flattered the boy, watched his ass wiggle provocatively to the bar and back, and swore that the next time someone took a passage to India on the stage, the casting couch would be his. For Shiva then, the piss pot system was simply daylight robbery. But for men like Samad in his 40s, and for the even older, like the white-haired Muhammad, Ardashir's great uncle, who was 80 if he was a day, who had deep pathways dug into the side of his mouth where he had smiled when he was young. For men like this, the piss pot could not be complained about. It was a boon, if anything, and it made more sense to join the collective than pocket 15 pence and risk being caught and docked a week's tip.
Okay, so let's think about how this system works, right? Who does it advantage and who does it disadvantage?
The older waiters that don't make much.
Yeah, the older waiters who don't make as much money are advantaged here, right? Because it means everybody's getting the same amount at the end of the night. So, if we're thinking about this in terms of economics, right? How would we describe this as a kind of economic system, or in terms of economic systems? Yeah, this is kind of like communist collectivist, right? Like everybody gets the same. In fact, communism is the word that Shiva uses for it, right? And the fact that Shiva has a negative connotation, like attaches a negative connotation to this term, also suggests something about his difference with the others, right? Because he's younger and apparently raised mostly in Britain, he has adopted Western values to a greater extent than the older men in the restaurant have, right? Who are in many cases still thinking like Bangladeshis. So this kind of collectivist mindset, right? On the whole, even democratic South Asia has had a much less contentious relationship with socialism and communism than Western countries typically have. So there's another thing to note here as well, right? What else do we know about the other waiters and staff who work in Ardashir's restaurant?
They're all family.
Yeah, they're all related, right? And Shiva, being the only Hindu, is not, right? Yeah, the other waiters are family. Even though Ardashir pretty relentlessly exploits them. Yeah, whereas Shiva is not related to the others. And thus does not feel those ties of family obligation that the others do to support each other. Now, there's also, I think, something here in acceptance of a particular position that's right. So can I get somebody to start reading from page 1240, the middle of the page, starting with you. Shiva swung around to where Samad stood crushing a great tub of lentils.
You, Shiva, swung around to where Samad stood, crushing a great tub of lentils for tomorrow's default. You're the worst of them. You're the worst waiter I've ever seen. You couldn't get a tip if you loved the bastards. I hear you trying to talk to the customer about biology this, politics that. Just serve the food, you idiot. You're a waiter, for fuck's sake. You're not Michael Parkinson. Did I hear you say deli? Shiva put his apron over his arm and began posturing around the kitchen. He was a pitiful mimic. I was there myself, you know, Delhi University. It was the most fascinating, yes. And I fought in the war for England, yes. Yes, yes, charming, charming. Round and round the kitchen he went, bending his head and rubbing his hands over and over like Uriah Heep, bowing and genuflecting?
Genuflecting, yeah.
Genuflecting. To the head cook, to the old man arranging great hunks of meat in the walk-in freezer, to the young boy scrubbing the inside of the oven. Samad, Samad, he said with that seemed infinite pity, then stopped abruptly, pulled the apron off and wrapped it around his waist. You're a sad bastard.
Thank you. So what is Shiva's, there are a couple of things actually I think we notice about Shiva and Shiva's values in this paragraph. For one thing, why does he think Samad is a bad waiter? What makes Samad a bad waiter?
He tries to talk to the customers or make a personable connection.
Yeah, so then he's dealing with them as though they're what socially?
Equal.
Yeah, exactly. Samad tries to put himself on an equal footing with the customers rather than behaving deferentially, right? Whereas Shiva kind of offers himself up as sex objects in addition to being deferential, right? Right? Samad wants to talk about politics or about his education or whatever, right? He wants to be more than a waiter. He wants to be a fully realized person. And all these people want is their curry, right? That's Shiva's argument here, right? But I think there's another thing that we notice about Shiva's points of reference here, right? When he talks about Michael Parkinson and Uriah Heep, so Uriah Heep is actually two things. Uriah Heep is a British heavy metal band from the 1970s, but that's not the relevant meaning. Uriah Heep is a character in Dickens' David Copperfield, who is noted for his kind of fake modesty and false humility, right? He's always cringing and groveling, while at the same time scheming to get himself to the top of the law firm. And Michael Parkinson is a British TV host, right? So what does this tell us about Shiva's set of cultural references?
From British literature, regular white British literature and TV.
Yeah, his basic set of cultural references are British, right? Not Indian. And even the restaurant in which they work, right? let's take a quick look at page 1239, where we see Samad taking orders here, right? A year's worth of Samad softly inclining his head at exactly the correct deferential angle, pencil in his right hand, notepad in his left, listening to the appalling pronunciation of the British, Spanish, American, French, Australian. Go buy Elo Sag, please. Chicken jail fret see with chips, thanks. So he's trying to puzzle out how these tourists from various parts of Britain, from Europe and the US, are like what they actually mean when they're trying to pronounce the names of Indian dishes. And I think part of like what's really telling here as well is this with chips, thanks. What does that mean? Yes. With and thanks it's mimicking British working class pronunciation, right? So yeah, this is somebody asking for fries with their curry, right? Which is something no one would do in India. But yeah, curry and chips is a pretty common takeaway food or like late night bar food in Britain. So it's kind of like one of those cultural fusion things, right? But yeah, with chips, thanks. So he has to get used to serving French fries alongside Indian food to these customers. Now, let's try to compare this with his wife Alsana's situation, particularly with her niece Nina. What's the nickname that Alsana gives to Nina?
Niece of shame.
Niece of shame, yes. Nina is the niece of shame. And what is Alsana's personality and value set like?
It's very like old world in the sense of like she's like, I don't need to talk to my husband, I just have to be able to like live with him.
Yeah.
Very much like the hierarchy of man over woman.
Uh-huh.
And it's not really like as generally seen that way of where they are now.
Yeah, she at least seems to consider herself a highly traditional Bangladeshi Muslim, right? Like even like when she talks about praying, right? It's not necessarily out of genuine faith. It's out of, the tradition and this is what you're supposed to do, right? Whereas Nina is clearly is younger, more educated, and much more British, right? Her values are much more Western. And where do we, pardon? Nobody said anything? Yeah, Nina's values are much more Western, right? But not necessarily, I don't think she's depicted in, Shiva is depicted almost in a selfish kind of way, right? Whereas I think the portrayal of Nina is a little bit more sympathetic here. So what are Nina's values like? How is she more Western?
She wants to marry for love. It's
Uh-huh.
like she made the comment about Alsana meeting Samad the day they got married.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, you don't like him, why are you with him?
Yeah, she's not a fan of the whole idea of arranged marriage, right? But what's Alsana's defense of arranged marriage? When did she like her husband the most?
She didn't know him very well.
Yeah, when she didn't know a damn thing about him, right? So the more I get to know him, the less I like him. So she's arguing, for secrets, right, and for hiding. In fact, I think we even see that in her first meeting with Clara when the Iqbals get off the plane on page 1238. Can I get somebody to start reading from They Looked an Unlikely Pair, kind of in the middle of the page?
They looked an unlikely pair. Alsana was small and rotund, moon-faced, with thick fingers she hid in the folds of her cardigan. Clara was tall, striking, a black girl with a winning smile, wearing red shorts of a shortness that Alsana had never imagined possible, even in this country.
So what do we notice about the difference here between Alsana and Clara? What's Alsana doing and what's Clara doing?
Alsana's kind of covering herself.
Yeah.
And she's
Claire's
judgy.
off.
Yeah. What were you saying, Savannah?
She's judgy.
Alsana is pretty judgy, yeah. we get a sense of that, right? But yeah, in this situation, I think what Jordan says here is right. Yeah, Alsana's covering up, and Clara is uncovering, right? So I think that this also gives us some sense both of cultural differences between these women and also simple personality differences, right? Yeah, Alsana doesn't understand hot pants, right? Even as she is apparently sewing these weird PVC outfits together for a London sex shop, right? To make money. She sews these things to a pattern, and then picks it, has no idea what the hell she's looking at, right? So there are a couple of concepts that I want to introduce here that I think will help us to understand some of the things going on in this text, and also some of the things that were going on in the stuff that we read for last time. So the first is Smith's own coinage of the term dream city. So this is an idea that pervades much of her work. For Smith, a dream city is a liminal space of multi-ethnic and multicultural contact. And I think that she tends to use, at least in this story and throughout this novel, the London neighborhood of Williston as a kind of dream city, right? So Williston is the neighborhood that the Iqbals moved to, where the Joneses are already living. And what's Williston like? How is Williston an improvement on where they were before? Right? So they start out in a neighborhood in East London called Whitechapel. Have any of you ever heard of Whitechapel before?
Like I have before, but not heard great things.
Not heard great things.
Yeah.
Well, Whitechapel was where the Jack the Ripper murders occurred in the late 19th century.
I thought it was like a bad
Yeah.
association.
Yeah, Whitechapel has long been kind of like a poor immigrant neighborhood. In the 70s, it was primarily Asian, particularly like Bangladeshis were particularly concentrated there. And what was the danger that tended to pursue them in Whitechapel? What are the things that the things, for example, that Alsana complains about or worries about?
Like destruction of her property, like breaking windows.
Yeah. There's this reference to National Front gangs, right? Have any of you ever heard of the National Front? Are any of you familiar with this? So the National Front, I mean, to put it kind of like most bluntly and crudely, the National Front were British Nazis. Neo-Nazi group. Racist anti-immigrant group. They adopted the skinhead look and wore heavy steel boots. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the original skinheads in the late 60s, early 1970s were a multiracial working class group of who were kind of united by a dislike of hippies. So they shaved their heads and no long hair. And a love for reggae music. And they tended to wear things like flannels and work boots as a kind of like signifier of working class identity. So the National Front adopts this look. And that's kind of what we associate with this with skinheads now, is this kind of racist thug attitude. But yeah, so it was pretty common in the 1970s for kind of gangs of young white working class men with shaved heads to, particularly bust up windows and sometimes people in Asian neighborhoods, regardless of the actual ethnicity of the people being assaulted. They usually refer to this activity as Paki bashing. Paki is a British slur for someone of South Asian descent. Again, no matter where they're actually from, right? If you're putting a slur on somebody, you don't actually care where they're really from. It's all about kind of stereotype. So this is the kind of thing they're running away from in Whitechapel. Then Williston, right? When we get the description, like, what does Williston look like? How is Williston better? Or at the very least, how is it different? Apart from the lack of National Front kids bashing windows. If we look on page 1243, as she's walking down the street wearing nothing but an overcoat because she tore up her clothes and threw them at her husband.
There were like homeless people floating around on mattresses.
Yeah, well, that was back in Whitechapel, right, where they came from. Williston was a little bit more affluent. But also, if you look further down here, right, Molly's Kebabs, Mr. Chung's, Raj's, Malkovich Bakeries. She read the new unfamiliar signs as she passed. What does this indicate about Williston and kind of the cultural makeup of Williston? So the business are things like Molly's Kebabs, Mr. Chung's, Raj's, Malkovich Bakeries.
That, ethnic diversity that's supposed to be present, because it's like all restaurants originating from different like cultures and Asian backgrounds. Malkovich is Eastern European. Chung's Chinese, right? Raj's Indian, Molly's Kebabs really Middle Eastern, right? So Williston is a site of ethnic hybridity and contact. And that's part of also what makes Alsana uncomfortable about it, right? At least in Whitechapel, everybody else was like her. In Williston, there are more people who aren't like, despite her husband's friendship with Archie Jones, which she's largely excluded from. It's not an area that's dominated by Bangladeshis. So, someone like Alsana, who is kind of more traditional in her outlook and more connected to things like family and old world culture, has a little bit harder time fitting in here, right? Now, there are a couple of other ideas that I want us to take away from you that I think are relevant to this particular story and our understanding of it. So have I introduced the term alterity to you before? I feel like we might have talked about this when we talked about colonial literatures in the Victorian period, but in case we didn't, I want to reintroduce it here. We might have talked about this when we talked about the T.N. Mukherjee piece. So to spare you having to go through your notes, Savannah.
I was like, I know we've talked about it.
Yeah. Okay, so alterity is the condition of always being other, right? So this is like the condition that is experienced, by someone who is not part of the dominant culture, right? Of always feeling like they are different, like they are other, like they are acted upon rather than acting, right? The expectation that they will assimilate into the dominant population, right? Something that neither Samad or Alsana seems easily able to do, right? Samad is kind of unable to assimilate to his position as waiter in a capitalist enterprise in the West, where he'd come to expect better things in Bangladesh. And Alsana is unable to assimilate to Western liberal values, right? Leading to conflict with her niece here, Nina. And I do want to talk a little bit, because we're running about out of time if I'm going to give you time to do the emails. I want to talk a little bit about this ending that troubled you because of its lack of closure, Savannah. And this character, Saul Jozefowicz. So, what can we determine is Saul Josefowicz's ethnic background with a name like that?
Jewish.
Yeah, he's Jewish and Eastern European, yeah. And so what happens what are they talking about? What are the women talking about when Saul walks up to them?
Abortion.
They're arguing about abortion, right? And the question Alsana asks him, right? I do not see what is so very funny, mutters Alsana. The murder of innocents, is this funny? Not in my experience, Mrs. Iqbal, no, says Saul Jozefowicz in the collected manner in which he says everything. So, what experience here is being alluded to?
The Holocaust.
Yeah. So you've got here an older Eastern European Jewish man in mid-1970s Britain, probably a refugee. Probably came there a few steps ahead of the Nazis. And, yeah, likely lost friends and or relatives, right? Yeah, so there's his historical experience lurking in the background of this conversation. And how does this change the whole tone of their conversation? Right, all he does is say this, pass a handkerchief to Clara to help her calm down, and then walk away.
They get they get silent, and it says they're embarrassed.
Yeah.
They were saying not that abortion isn't important to them, but they were saying that and then not taking into account his experience of the killing of innocents.
Yeah. Yeah, that when they're confronted with Saul's subjective experience, right, in human concrete form, right? Here's somebody who survived a mass slaughter of innocent people. it's hard to talk about these abstract notions again, right? Of what's right, what's wrong, you know, what's permissible, what isn't. And, you know, this, you know, quiet, dignified individual, we have these tensions within a multicultural community brought to the fore, right? It doesn't become angry or heated, right? But what we do have here in a lot of ways in this dream city is people with different values and different sets of expectations and different sets of experiences having to learn to live with each other, right? And having to learn to respect one another without stepping on toes. And, you know, not being able to have things one's own way all the time. And I think that's kind of where the story, where this little snippet of Smith's novel leaves us, and maybe why it feels a little inconclusive to you, and like it kind of leaves you hanging. But yeah, if you want to resolve that, yeah, just, you know, hey, you've got the summer, right? You know, go read White Teeth. All right, so I don't have reading questions for you because you don't have anything more to read for this class. So it is 1:32. So I am going to log out here and get out of your hair and give you a chance to just kind of go in and fill out the student evaluation. You can find it on Georgia View. You can just kind of go in. You can just go in on your phone.
Did we get it through email?
I think if you go to the front page of Georgia View, it'll give you a link to it.
I think I did.
Yeah, let's say they emailed it out to us too.
Okay, yeah, and yeah, like I said, like if you've already done it, cool, you can just go.
I think I already did.
Yeah.